Canadians, we're polite, we're reasonable, but we also will not be pushed around.
To say that Canada's special relationship with the United States has fallen apart and gone completely off the rails after the G7, which was a bit of a disaster, would be a charitable way of putting it. I'm here with Canada's former Foreign Affairs Minister and former National Defence Minister and current law partner at a Toronto law firm, Baker McKenzie. Peter MacKay is here. So your assessment of what has happened. Justin Trudeau is standing up, in his view, for Canada's rights. A pretty extraordinary thing, Peter. Everyone's united against Donald Trump with Justin Trudeau.
Well, Adrian, great to be here and to talk about this. Clearly, this summit, this G7, did not go as planned. Certainly didn't go as Mr. Trudeau would have wanted. And yes, there is a feeling that the country is rallying around the position that's been laid out, which is that Canada won't be pushed around. Unfortunately, there are still a lot of shoes to drop, I think, in this story. Mr. Trump showed up, flipped over the table, hijacked the agenda, and really reiterated that he is going to Bigfoot everybody on trade. That is his number one agenda, and he wasn't going to be thrown off by that. I think there was perhaps a small opportunity missed, and I'm not standing up for him by any stretch of the imagination, but he was embarking on this important mission to Singapore to try to de-escalate nuclearization on the Korean Peninsula. Canada, of course, has a long history in Korea, and I think a word of congratulations and best wishes on that effort might have taken a little bit of the edge off. Mr. Trump appeared to be in a particularly nasty mood coming in. He came late, left early. And so that set him off for one reason or another. Nobody can really explain what happens in the dark recesses of his mind. Okay, and so of course we know that a number of the Trump surrogates have gone on the Sunday talk show circuit and have said some very nasty things.
There's a special place in hell for any foreign leader that engages in bad faith diplomacy with President Donald J. Trump and then tries to stab him in the back on the way out the door.
It's not helpful with getting back to the trade table and negotiating what are at issue. And let's talk a little bit about some of those issues. We're talking about supply management. President Trump has said, Canada has put these unfair tariffs and we're charging so much more against their dairy producers. So let's tackle that first.
Well, look, I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding on the U.S. side of the border about the impact that our dairy sector would have on theirs. There are more cows in Wisconsin than there are in Canada. So it's not a result of an oversupply in Canada that is hurting them. Having said that, our government, the government of Stephen Harper, did make some concessions when we were in the Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement with the European Union. And we made some give and take, which is what happens in a trade agreement. So we shouldn't rule that out in its entirety, but we need something in exchange. If that means taking this poison pill of a 5-year sunset clause off the table or backing away from some of the threats around auto, it may be worth exploring. So this negotiation, us staying at the table in NAFTA, is the critical piece. And I think that, personal invective aside and some of the rage that was expressed, we've got to step back from that. We've seen this before, by the way. I think that there is a bit of a history of sometimes personal tensions.
Yeah, erupting. I know. A lot of people are freaking out and saying, "Hey, look, this is the best for the largest undefended border in the world. Majority of our trade goes north and south with the United States." But again, this isn't the first time we've had two, U.S. President and Canadian Prime Minister go after each other.
Well, Nixon and Trudeau Sr. had a very poor working relationship. We saw it with Diefenbaker and Kennedy. And President Johnson famously grabbed our Prime Minister Pearson by the lapels over frustrations in Vietnam. So we've seen the highs and lows. For the most part, the most engaging reality between our countries has been military to military. Certainly our economies are so integrally linked now. And I think person to person, I believe we have to look to the positive. We'll get by this. And this is a bit of an impasse. There's no doubt.
So I want to pivot from another aspect that happened with respect to what President Trump was saying at the G7. And that was to go back to the G8 and allow Russia at the table. Former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, a cabinet you served in for many, many years, that the Conservative government was actually the moving force behind getting Russia out of the G7. What is your view on this notion of bringing them back in?
Absolutely not. You're right. We were in office when that decision to remove them from the G8 was taken.
After the invasion of Crimea.
It was over the unlawful invasion of Ukraine, Crimea. They annexed. And they haven't changed. In fact, if anything, they become more aggressive, more malevolent, more threatening to Baltic countries. And we know that the cyber activity continues unabated. So that's a non-starter. I think all of the countries, with the exception of Italy, came out quite strongly against that suggestion. And I think as far as the necessity to stay unified and to keep the pressure on countries like Russia, but also Iran, is a critically important adhesive, if you will, to the G7.
Where are we going to, moving forward now, with respect to the G7, with respect to all these issues on supply management and potential auto tariffs, which could absolutely cripple the Canadian economy? Are we going to have to capitulate a little bit and say, all right, U.S., we're going to be a little more friendly, we're going to eat a little crow here, so to speak? What tools does Canada have in its toolkit in order to make this work?
Well, I think that's the critical question, Adrian, and I don't call it capitulation, I call it smart negotiating. Okay. And staying at the table, and of course there's this suggestion now that we go it alone, that we come back to what was originally the Canada-U.S. trade relationship. Needs to also be contemplated. But if it's giving a little on supply management, if it is in exchange for worthwhile positions that the United States have laid out but may be willing to take back, I'm also worried about the energy sector. Let's be honest. They're our number one customer now. They are our number one competitor. And if we see taxes on automobiles, but more importantly, if we see an attack on our energy sector, this is the type of thing that could trigger a recession. That sounds apocalyptic, but these are the times that we're living in currently.
Very few solutions, a lot more questions than answers. We'll find out if Canada and U.S. remain frenemies. Log on to Facebook and Twitter and let us know what you think.